Hi again. So this is Mr. Ford, and we're going to be operating through types of data, which is the start of a really small section just on how we can look at data. So what we've got here, we've got our dual coding. So as you can probably learn, we would have learned a lot of different types of things at GCSE, and back in the lower levels, we would have learned there's two main types of data. So there is quantitative. Now, this is data that is on quantities. So quantities being a numerical value. So numbers. So anything where we're actually taking numbers or numbers are our result, that is a quantitative data. The other one is that we've got qualitative data. Okay, so there's also qualitative data. Now, qualitative data is where we're talking about a quality. So if I'm thinking I wanted to talk about a quality of a person, I could say they're good, they're bad, they're a very happy person, they're a very sad person. I'm less likely to talk about numbers here. So that's why qualitative data is when we're talking about words. So that's your first two main types. Now, you would have learned that in the earlier years, but that is a nice little recap. Now, some of those words up there you would have seen, some you might not, might be brand new to you. So the first ones we're going to look at, we're going to look at the ones you've already seen. Okay, so the difference between discrete and continuous. So as you might have done already, discrete is things that have an actual value, a point. So that means that I cannot have intermediate ranges between them. So something that is discrete is if I gave you a 10-mark question, test and then you had to answer that, I would give you a grade out of 10. You can't get 5.5. Especially for multiple choice, you could either get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, and of course 0. So those are your options. You don't have options in between. They are discrete, they are defined by certain numbers. Now, the other one is continuous. Now, continuous are usually things that you measure. Okay, so things that you can measure are things like time. You can measure time. You can measure time in hours. You can then break that up into decimals or fractions of an hour. So you could go to 1 hour and 1.05 or 1.5 hours, which is 1.5 hours, just a fraction. And 1.5 hours is the same as an hour and 30 minutes. Now, I could keep breaking this into smaller and smaller increments of time. That's why we call them continuous, because it is a continuous range from 0 and up and into the negatives. Okay, but when we're measuring things, we can't get out negative numbers, which is really useful later on if you're doing some other subjects, because some things can't have negatives, and that's going to help you isolate results. But that's our quantitative data. Now, on this booklet here, you're going to have that. You have discrete, specific values exist and cannot be decimals or fractions, like your house number. Now, you can sometimes get decimals or fractions, but it's more the fact that there are not specific numbers. Okay, so what you've got here with discrete, they have to be exactly this number. You can't have 3.5 people. You're going to have 3 people or 4. We don't have half a person. Continuous, though, is where we're talking about actually those numbers is generally what you are actually measuring. And usually they're rounded. Even when you measure with a ruler, even when you measure with a stopwatch, you're going to be actually rounding that as well. So you don't measure to an accurate level, you measure to the accuracy that you have. So if you have a stopwatch and it measures to 1 decimal place on a second's time, that is its accuracy. That doesn't mean that it's not measuring either side of that. It just means that's its rounding. Okay, that's our quantitative, our quantities. The other one is then we've got qualitative. So we've got our qualities. So there's two. Now, this is where it might be new to you. So we have nominal. We'll come back to that in a second. And we've got ordinal. Now, ordinal is really, really easy to think about because all we have to think about is it's an order. Can I put it into an order? Now, it just does get tricky, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment. But ordinal data is anything I can put into a order. So if I think of good, better, or best, I can put that good being the least best of those options and best being the most best out of those options. So I can put it in an order. which is really useful when I start doing things on graphs and displaying data. So ordinal data is any qualitative data that you can order. And then nominal means it's data that is not orderable. So yes, we can order red, green, and yellow. I can put it in a certain order. You could even put it in a certain order as per the color wheel. Problem is, which way you're going to go, left or right. There is no predefined set where we have it done. Yes, we've got different things, and that's where it gets interesting. In art versus science, there's different ways that color is ordered. In art, we've got our composite colors that opposite each other, where in science, we've got our colors that are made up from the way that they're reflected and absorbed. Okay, so because you've got these different things, nominal is where we cannot have an order. That's why colors is a good option. Now, I've got all of this here, and it is actually written down here. So nominal, results that do not have a natural ordering. So gender could be another one. Male and female. There is no order. Which one goes first? Now, I'm not there to create arguments. I'm just getting you to think, but there is no ordering behind it. Okay? And we have the ordinal, which is where they can be ordered, like small, medium, and large. Small being the smallest, large being the largest. We have grades. Grades E, D, C, B, A, and A star. They would actually be ordinal data. This is the one little thing where it gets tricky. Is I could arrange numbers for this. I could arrange this as a 9, an 8, a 7, a 6, a 5, and a 4 as a grade. The biggest problem with this is the fact that when we're talking about this, we could use it as discrete, but the sizes might be different. So I'd leave it as ordinal because the difference between an E to a D could be different to the distance to a C. So this might only have you might have a 10% difference between an E and a D, but only might be a 5% difference between a D and a C. So it is ordinal because the differences between them can still be ordered. You still have a low to a high or high to a low, however you'd like to order them, which you will choose. But the difference of the gaps between them actually are going to be changed. Okay, so they don't have to have equal spacing for ordinal. Now, of course, as that's why it's better to do things with discrete and continuous data that have equal spacing, but we'll talk about that, especially with our psychologist. You will have an opportunity to discuss what sort of style you'll be using. So, what we've got now, I'm going to go through this I do section. So, each one of these chapters in this book is going to have some section where it's got some information for you. It's going to have a section where I do and I show you and talk through what they're going to be. And then there's going to be a you do section for you to do. Okay, so let's look at this here. So we've got these three examples. So we've got people that are taking surveys or data, and we need to decide what sort of data they are taking. Okay, what is their survey getting? Is it giving nominal, ordinal, discrete, or continuous data? Now, at the start, as normally when we do anything, it's going to seem, why do we have to categorize them? As you go through, you're going to have to do a statistics test to show what's called significance. Now, choosing what test you're going to do is going to determine based on what you're actually going to receive in your data. So if you have nominal data versus ordinal data, it's going to change how you're actually going to compare them against each other. You're going to have to do different tests compared to what you want. So to make sure you know that there's a significance to certain values. But we're going to go through that later. So first off, let's look at this first one. So 1A, the observer counted the number of students who wore red on Tuesday. Okay, now this is very interesting because we're counting. So we're going to get a result that is going to give us a number. Now, this is where it's tricky because people are going to think, oh, I'm counting, I'm getting a number. It's going to be quantitative. But unfortunately, you're not right because what we're actually observing here is we're observing a color. We are observing red. So my survey, I might have a tick sheet and I'll be taking up, all right, are they wearing red? how many people are wearing red, how many people are wearing blue, how many people are wearing white. So I could be doing a tick sheet as I'm doing this. I'm going to get a tally. So I'm going to get a number, 3, 2, and 1. Now, just because I'm getting numbers doesn't mean that it's quantitative. It's about what the survey is. And this survey is about colors. So our survey is taking a qualitative data. So that means it's going to be, and in this case, we're taking something that doesn't have an order, color. So it is going to be nominal data we are receiving. And I can't spell. Okay. The reason why? Because we are observing color, which is qualitative, which is qualitative, and with no defined order or ordering. Okay, and then we're going to go through the next one. Okay, but that's exactly what you're trying to think. What's the sort of data that we're receiving? And the really interesting part is a lot of nominal data that you receive actually is about counting frequencies. Let's look at the next one. The time taken for each student to complete a test. So we're actually, what is the thing we're recording? We are recording a time. Well, time itself, we know it is a continuous result because it's something that has incrementally small values. So we're recording a time taken, so that means we're going to take a continuous, it's continuous data. Okay, because time is a continuous, we're measuring something that has incrementally small amounts. Last but not least, okay, we have sleep score of participants on a scale of 1 to 10 on how well they slept, where 1 is not well at all and 10 is they slept very well. Another one really interesting, we're taking more numbers. Okay. Now, this is not nominal because there is actually an order to it, with 1 being very little and 10 being very good. So it is, but it actually has to be qualitative because we're talking about it in terms of words, not well at all versus slept very well. There's another point as well. This is something that you talk about in things like psychology, and it's the fact that when you're doing these surveys, people are going to have different opinions on what a 10 is. Their 10 is going to be comparable to their best sleep ever. Okay, compared to, so some people might be putting a 5 down, and it might be just as good as somebody putting an 8 down. So the differences between a 1 to a 2 are not going to always be the same. But the point being, this will be ordinal because it is a qualitative, because we're talking about the words itself. It's a description result. It's a description result, and it is orderable. You can order it. Okay. Thank you so much. What I want you to do now is on the next page, there's some you do to do, and then an exam question, actually, where you go through some steps.